Hi there. This movement practice is going to be heavily focused on the hamstrings. To join along, you may need some kind of a strap. Here in the rainforest, we've kind of made our own strap from some material and it's been sewn together in a particular way to give us a little loop at the end. You don't necessarily need a specially designed strap. A belt will suffice, or perhaps even a towel rolled up in a long line, in order to be able to sort of extend the arms at certain points throughout this movement practice. To begin with, we're going to start on our backs. So come on down onto your back. And we're just going to bring one leg into our chest. To start with, use your hands to draw the knee in, just to see how far you can bring the knee in towards the chest, keeping it bent for these first few moments. And then after you've done that a couple of times, bring your hands behind the hamstrings, behind the back of the knee. Keep drawing the knee in towards the chest with the hands, and then when you get it to its final position, keep the knee there and just start to straighten the leg as much as you can. And at a certain point, as you're keeping the knee stationary in exactly the same location, you'll notice that as you straighten the leg, the hamstrings start to get a little bit of a sensation of stretch. And so we're just going to do that a couple of times, releasing that and repeating, trying to keep the knee in exactly the same position that it's in. One more of those. And then if you have a strap or a belt or something like that, place it around the foot or around the back of the leg. And then straighten the leg out, that very same leg. And then keeping the leg in full extension, the knee in full extension, draw the leg in as close towards you as you can until you feel the right amount of sensation in the hamstrings for a stretch here. Once you've found that spot, if you can reach for the leg, go for it with your hands. Otherwise, maybe the strap comes down around the calf muscles here. Keep the leg straight, and then from there, just go for some little ankle circles. As you do that, especially focusing on the range of dorsiflexion, so as the toes come towards the knee, focus particularly on that range, and then try to avoid letting the knee bend, come into flexion. A few circles in one direction, and then reverse. You may notice that the sensation at the back of the leg changes as you do this. So if you feel like there's a little bit more room, feel free to draw the leg a little closer towards your chest, keeping the knees straight. And once you've done a few circles in the opposite direction, let go of the strap. Without the use of the hands this time, pull the knee in towards the chest. Keep it there with the strength of your will. Don't let the knee move. And begin to work the leg towards straight. At a certain point, again, you will start to feel lengthening in the back of the leg, and you'll feel like your knee wants to run away from you. But please don't let it. Keep it in as close towards your chest as you can without the use of the hands. And then release that. Double check that the knee didn't move anywhere by pulling it in towards the chest a little bit more. Keep it there. And straighten out the leg. Working it towards straight. It probably won't get there. trying to keep the knee in exactly the same position. Release for one more. Keep the knee where it is. Work the leg towards straight. Pause at the edge. And release. Switch sides. Start by using your hands, just pulling the knee in towards the chest. A couple of those before taking a grip behind the knee. Draw the knee in towards your chest as much as you can. Keep it there with the assistance of your hands. And then work the leg towards straight. Again, it may not make it towards straight. In fact, it probably won't make it to straight. Pause at the edge before releasing and then repeating. Working that leg towards straight. Pausing at the edge before releasing. Third one. Keep the knee where it is. Work the leg towards straight. Pause at the edge. Release. Reach for your strap. Straighten out the leg. Keep the knee in extension as you explore hip flexion and see where you start to feel the right amount of stretch in the hamstrings for right now. Once you've found that spot, if you can reach your leg, use your hands. Otherwise, place the strap, bring the strap down around the lower calf muscles. Keep the knee in extension and take the foot in circles, especially focusing on dorsiflexion here, drawing the toes towards the knee without letting the knee come into flexion. So try for a few nice big circles in one direction. If you notice a little bit more space becomes available to you in the hamstrings to pull the leg a little bit closer and you'd like to move into that, go for it. After a few in one direction, switch direction of the movements of the ankle. Particularly focused on your dorsiflexion range. After an even number of circles in the opposite direction, get rid of the strap. Without using the hands, draw the knee back in towards the chest as much as you can. Keep it there with the strength of your will, without the use of the hands, and work the leg towards straight. Your end point is where the sensation either becomes significant or your knee wants to run away from you. Avoid letting that happen. Pause at the edge, release that for a moment, and repeat. Double check in between that the knee didn't run away, pull it in back to its terminal position, and work the leg towards straight. Keep the knee exactly where it is, don't let it run away. Bend the knee again, double check that the knee hasn't run away, and one more. Working the leg towards straight, keeping the knee stationary. And bending the knee to release. Bring both knees into the chest, give them a little squeeze. And then we're going to come up to a seated position. So make your way up. Taking your legs out in front of you. And taking them nice and wide to start with. sitting up tall and straightening the legs. And if you feel enough sensation sitting up like this and keeping the legs straight in the hamstrings, stay relatively close to this position and just make some small movements from side to side. If there's more space to move, then perhaps exploring a little bit more side to side range. And we're going to avoid using our hands for this one, so that we have to push our leg down into the floor in order to control the movement of our body. If there's more room, move a little bit further, just tipping ourselves towards each leg incrementally. And using the strength of the leg, especially to come back up. Explore a little bit here. You might also come in through the center and switch to the other side. As you do this, if there's more range available, you might choose to move into it or not. Just a couple of moments here. After you've played with that for a little bit, bring the feet in, come up into a little bit of a squat. And we're just going to give the ankles a little bit of love to start with. Coming into your squat and lifting the heels as high as you can. Once they're at their highest point, starting to hover the fingertips away from the ground and just pausing here in this position where the heels are lifted and you're adding in the element of balance. Just going to get a bunch of the smaller muscles in the feet and around the ankles to warm up, getting them to do some work here. So just holding and pausing, utilizing your toes pushing down into the floor in an effort to control your position. If you find that the hands are necessary momentarily, use that and then return to a position where the hands are floating off the floor. Play around with it a little bit. Take a few more moments. We want to get those muscles nice and warm. And start to bring the heels back towards the floor wherever they make it is great. And then come into a forward fold. In this forward fold position, bend your knees to begin with, just to make some closer contact between the torso and the legs. And then when you're down here with bent legs, just see what it feels like to straighten or work the legs towards straight, keeping your torso in a relatively similar position. You might do it one side at a time. It might be a small movement, it might be a larger movement. Just take a moment to see what that feels like for the hamstrings. And after exploring that a little bit, come to a position with the torso that allows your legs to be straight. With that straight leg, I'm going to ask you to float 1 foot off the floor. Keep that foot floating and hold your position by balancing on your one leg. Try to keep that standing leg in full extension at the knee. Oftentimes we add in a little bit of a bend into the knee. Today we're going to keep it fully straight. Having the knee fully straight actually gives us more availability of the hamstrings to control this action. Taking a couple more moments here. Trying to direct your breathing in and out through the nose. And slowly switch. Set your other foot down. Transition weight towards the other foot. Find a position where that leg can be straight. The knee is in extension. And hover the opposite foot. And hold. Pause here. Some nice slow breaths. Keeping that other foot hovering for 2 more breaths. And after those 2 breaths, softly setting that hovering foot down. Take a moment to give each knee a little bit of a bend. We're going back to the first side. But we're going to do it with the intent of coming up to standing. As we go, so when we come up to standing from a forward fold, oftentimes what happens is the spine starts the movement and the hips follow last. We're going to try and reverse that. We're going to try and do the opposite and have the hips leading this movement and the spine following last. So that means a couple of things. We're trying to drive the movement from the hamstrings, which means the sitting bones are what we're thinking about coming towards the floor first. As a different focus for that same effort, we're thinking about driving flexion through the lumbar spine first, keeping that flexion through the lumbar spine, and then coming all the way up to standing with flexion in the lumbar spine. A little bit different to how you might come up to standing. So find the first foot. Keep that leg super duper straight. It's going to really want to bend. Don't let it. And then to come up to standing, drive flexion through the lumbar spine first. Think about the ischial tuberosity, the sitting bone moving down. Come all the way up before the spine makes it back to a neutral position. Now go back down. Keep the legs straight. Legs straight, legs straight, legs straight. Go towards a position where the leg can stay straight, but you're still getting a nice stretch in the back of the leg. Then reverse. Come back up again. Drive the action with flexion at the lumbar spine first. That way the hip is driving the movement and the hamstrings are leading the chase. At the very top, the spine follows. Come back down. Nice and slowly and with control. Keep the leg straight. The leg stays straight. For 1 more. Flexion through the lumbar spine. Drive that flexion first. And then stand really slowly all the way up. And hopefully you're noticing that the posterior chain of that standing leg, especially the hamstrings, are having to do a lot of work now. Come back to your forward fold. Keep the foot hovering until you get back down to the bottom, at which point you're going to slowly switch, take a moment of blessed relief, and transfer your weight to the second side. Keep that leg straight. You're in a forward fold. Drive the standing process by bringing flexion into the lumbar spine, driving the hips to move first, and then only when you get all the way up to standing does the spine follow. Come back down. Control the action, keep a straight leg for that standing leg. 2 more of these, really slowly. Come on up to standing, drive flexion through the lumbar spine first. Only when you get to standing does the spine return to its neutral position before we reverse back down. One more, just for good luck as always. Drive flexion of the lumbar spine first. Move from the hips. The hamstrings have to pull that ischial tuberosity, that sitting bone, down towards the floor first. And then when you get all the way up to the top, your spine follows. To finish the movement, we've got to head back down. Slower than you want to. Keep the standing leg straight. At the bottom, set the other foot down. Take a moment to bend the knees, maybe come into a little bit of a squat. Do something that might feel like you need it in this moment. And after you've taken a moment, come back to a forward fold. This time we're going to use both feet on the floor, and hopefully it gives a little bit of a different frame for maybe another option for coming up to standing. Both feet are down, both legs straight in your forward fold, wherever that is, and repeat the same effort. Drive flexion through the lumbar spine first, and include the hamstrings more in the process of standing up. Once you get to the top, take a nice wide stance. A nice wide stance. Straighten the legs again. Maybe bring your hands out in front and just take a moment to find the right amount of stretch here, relatively passively. Wherever that is for you, keeping the legs again in extension, or the knees in extension, I should say, to be more specific. Keeping those knees straight. Once you've found a nice degree of sensation or degree of stretch, transition more weight forward. Use your hands to start with on the floor, and maybe switch between forward and back for a moment, but particularly spend a little bit more time with your weight moving forward in your feet. After doing that a couple of times, hover the hands off the floor, keep the knees in extension, and then repeat that hovering forward of weight and hovering back. And hovering forward, transferring weight forward in the feet, transferring weight backwards in the feet, and then as you come forward this next time, pause here. Keep the depth, keep the knees straight, and keep your weight forward in your feet. Take a couple of moments here, deep breaths. One more breath. Then we're going to come up to standing. See if you can utilize your tools from the standing forward fold and come all the way up, drawing lumbar flexion to come all the way up to standing. Take a step towards the top of the mat, or if you haven't got a mat, just take a step forward. Set yourself up. with a nice lunge. In this lunge, just to start with, take a moment to sort of move weight around. And then I'd like you to find a position where you are moving your weight forward, trying to keep the back leg straight, and then scooching the front foot forward an inch or two, which may be a little bit of a longer stance than you might be used to, and that's okay. Then sink a little bit more into that front leg before lifting the front heel off the floor as much as you can. With greater flexion at the knee and with plantar flexion at the ankle, we're driving more activity in those front hamstrings. Enjoy the shake, enjoy the wobble, take a couple of breaths here. After the breath that you're on, gradually let that front heel come down to the floor. Bring your hands down either side of the front foot. Step back and take a moment in a downward facing dog. You might prefer stillness, or you might prefer a little bit of walking or movement here. You choose. Optionally, you may come forward to a little plank, and then really slowly lower down all the way onto your belly. Untuck the toes, lift the chest. Think about scapulocostal retraction. Think about bringing the shoulder blades towards one another behind you. And taking a couple of breaths here. Resetting the hands down on the floor, tucking the toes, pressing into the balls of the feet so that your knees and hips lift. Then, a little challenge to hover the chest off the floor before pushing back up to a plank. And then to downward facing dog. After a couple of breaths here in downward dog, bring the opposite foot forward to the foot that was forward before. Come up into a lunge position. Take a moment, like we did on the other side, just for a little bit of movement here. Just a little bit of exploration. And then when you're ready, I'd like you to settle into moving your weight forward. So you're really driving the back heel forward in space. You're working the back leg towards straight. And then from that position, we're going to scooch the front foot a couple of inches forward of its normal position. Bend a little bit further into the front leg and lift the front heel. Having greater flexion at the knee drives more activity of the hamstrings, and having the calf muscles contributing more movement at the ankle means that they don't get to help out as much with stabilizing the knee, and so the hamstrings have to do extra work to make up for the work that the calf muscles would otherwise be doing. Taking a few more breaths here, enjoying the shake, the challenge, the wobble. See if you can breathe in and out through the nose. And then after the breath that you're on, softly hovering the front heel back to the ground. Step back, place the hands either side of the front foot, and come into a down dog. Maybe finding some movement here if that feels good and necessary. And then optionally coming forward to a plank. You could stay in down dog if you so choose, before lowering gradually to the floor, untucking the toes, and coming into a little bit of a spinal extension here. Hover the hands off the floor. Draw the shoulder blades in towards one another. You may or may not be able to see scarlet macaws flying in the background. Hopefully you can see that. That's a bit of a miracle story of this zone of Costa Rica, but I'll save that story for another time. After your few breaths here, bring the hands back to the floor, tuck the toes, press into the balls of the feet so that the knees and the hips lift. Press into the hands and hover the chest off the ground for a moment before pushing back up and returning to down dog. Couple of breaths here. And then we're going to come on up to standing using our specially designed process of coming to standing. Come into your forward fold. Start with flexion of the lumbar spine and drive the process of standing from the hamstrings. Once you're all the way up, take a nice long stance. I'm just changing directions so that it changes things up in the video. You don't have to change directions at home. With your stance, set up as though you're going into either warrior two or into a triangle position. If you're not familiar with what those positions are, take a nice wide stance. The back foot has a slight angle out to the side, but the whole bed of the foot is still on the floor. Okay, the heel, instead of floating like it is in a lunge, the heel is down on the floor. Make your stance a little bit wide. Again, taking this position perhaps somewhere a little bit new for you. This front leg, please try to keep it straight. We almost always have a bent knee in this triangle position. We're going to do it differently today. Just bear with me. The reason we do that is again so that we have greater availability of the hamstrings to support the action. Bring your hands to your front leg and just press that front leg both down towards the floor and sort of back towards the back foot. At a certain point, your quads will sort of want to come on and contract. Please allow that. Allow them to contract, and if they're not contracting by default, see if you can get them to contract with conscious effort. Keep the leg in extension, the knee in extension, and then tip your torso a little bit further forward. Once you've got a nice degree of tip from your torso, hover the hands away from any support. If you feel that your knee wants to bend, if it's just simply trying to bend, reverse out a little bit and work on that range first before adding more tip to the torso. Taking a few breaths here, you may decide to open the arms. They're less important here today in this triangle version. What's more important is that the front leg stays straight and you take a couple of nice deep breaths. Take another one, another deep breath. And then if you're not looking down, take a look down and bend into that front knee really slowly with control before setting the hands down on the floor, taking a step back, maybe going for a little walk with your down dog, maybe staying there, or maybe coming forward to a plank, lowering all the way down to the ground gradually, finding a little bit of extension through the thoracic spine, hovering the hands, drawing the shoulder blades together behind you, and then reversing back, tucking the toes, pressing the balls of the feet down, lifting the knees, lifting the hips, hovering the chest for a moment, and then pushing back up to your down dog. At which point we step the opposite foot forward and the back heel of the back foot comes down. Straightening out the legs, widening the stance more than you normally would. Bringing the hands to the front leg, pushing the leg down towards the ground and back towards the back foot. Try to find that spot where the quads come online. If they don't contract by themselves, think about contracting them with a little bit of conscious effort. And then keep the knee in extension, please, and hover the hands off any support. If the knee is really trying to bend, if it's really trying to get out of here, release a portion of the angle of your torso and work that range to start with. It can be really tricky to get them to get the knees to stay here in extension where we want them, because we so often train the bend that it's a difficult habit to break, and it's difficult to find the support of the musculature around the knee in such a heavy position. Take one more breath. And then slowly, really slowly with control, bend into that knee. Bring the hands down to the floor. Step back to a down dog. And if you feel so inclined, coming through your plank, gradually lowering down to the floor for our last little flow here. Bringing some extension in through the thoracic spine. A couple of breaths here. Returning the hands to the floor, tuck the toes, press the balls of the feet down, lift the knees, lift the hips, hover the chest, and then return to a down dog for a moment before coming down to a seated position. Finding a nice wide angle that we were working on before, we're going to tip our torso towards each leg, any amount, just like we were doing at the start, and controlling the action with the back of the leg by pushing the leg down into the floor. You may notice that there's maybe a little bit more range here now after having gone through a practice dedicated to activating the hamstrings in different ranges of motion. Again, you can get a little bit creative, explore the range in the middle as well. After exploring this wide-legged position, I'm going to get you to bring the legs together, and then beyond bringing the legs together, take one leg over the top, try to stack the knees on top of one another, and then fold forward from that position. This particular arrangement of the legs helps us to focus the stretch a little bit more in towards the lateral hamstring. And in a lot of our wide-legged work, which is most of the hamstring work that we do, we're getting the more medial hamstrings both activated and lengthened a little bit more. So it can be really different to cross the legs over and direct this stretch a little bit more in towards the lateral hamstring. You may notice that there's a substantial difference in range of motion here. There may not be, but also quite commonly there is. Just like our other stretch work, we're sort of going in without the support of our hands, and we're coming out without the support of our hands. Just a couple more of these. Switch sides. The other leg goes on top, and we try to stack the knees on top of one another. Just leaning in and leaning back as your range of motion on this side permits. One more of those. And after you finish that one, we're going to set up for a little bit of focused meditation time, just a short meditation. You may decide to lie down instead. If you decide to do that, go ahead. You may decide to be seated. Whatever allows you to direct your focus and maintain consciousness. This is not an opportunity to fall asleep just yet. Wherever you are, lying down or seated, if it's comfortable for you, closing your eyes. If not, you can keep them open. And the intent here is we're just going to direct our breathing in and out through the nose. And we're just going to focus on how our body feels right now. So do a little bit of a scan. Perhaps starting in the feet and scanning your way up the body, noticing any sensations that you notice. It might be the temperature of your skin. It might be a tingling from the work. It might be the sweat trickling down your leg, if you're anything like me. It might be a breeze on your skin. It might be your other leg touching your skin. It might be the floor. Just pay attention to any sensation that you can notice. Exploring that direction of attention a little bit further up the leg, maybe around the knees, maybe a little bit further. You might even feel your pulse in certain regions of the body. incrementally bringing your attention further up through the torso, perhaps in the hips to start with. Continuing to drive that attention further up into the body, maybe up and towards the chest or the shoulders. Just paying attention to any sensation that you feel. Continuing that attention transfer out into the arms, maybe down towards the elbows, and on the way noticing what you feel. Down into the hands. What sensations do you notice into the hands? After the hands, coming back on up to the neck and the head, doing a little bit of a scan there as well, identifying some of those sensations that you notice. If you'd like to stay here and continue this scanning work, please go ahead and start again. If you are ready for the rest of your day, just start to softly open the eyes. And then incrementally adding a little bit of movement into the limbs. Just go softly, just go slowly. And as you reanimate your limbs, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for joining me in this practice, and I do hope to see you again soon.